So I am here at the Jackson Hole Summit again with John Fund, who I'm sure most of you know. And we were talking yesterday during his speech, he was talking about people pressing presidential candidates to talk about the monetary policy and fiscal policy and the Federal Reserve. And I'd like you to explain that further and give us your thoughts on that, if you would, please.
Well, the biggest uncertainty and the biggest insecurity most Americans have is that the average American's wages and income hasn't gone up in well over a decade. If we had had a Reagan-style recovery the last decade, the average American would have something like $10,000 more a year income than they do now. Instead, they've lost ground on average. They've lost $1,000 or more in income. So they're treading water, and they're also slowly sinking. They're not getting any closer to shore. And a lot of people are really hard-pressed. Healthcare costs are up. People's insurances are being canceled. College costs are way up. A lot of kids have to take on an enormous amount of debt because parents don't have the income to help them, which is what they used to do. So I think our monetary policy of zero interest rates has helped lots of people in the stock market. The Fed's policy was directly tied to benefiting equities, to holding up the stock market, and it's done a good job of that until very recently. But if you're earning an income, if you're working off the sweat of your brow, or you're doing wage income, you're stagnant. So inequality is growing in America, and that's part of the reason. And presidential candidates have to be asked, how are you going to address the stagnant wage problem? What is your plan? Now, lots of the Republican candidates have tax reform and regulatory reform and other ideas, but monetary policy has to be a piece of that, because the Fed is a much bigger part of our lives than it used to be, and by dictating monetary policy, it dictates the extent to which we can have an economic recovery, and we haven't had much of one since the recession ended in 2009.
And now, do you think that people understand enough about the monetary policy to be able to have a serious discussion with their candidates?
I think you start the discussion, and basically it's not the voters trying to come to a solution; it's the voters demanding a solution from the candidates. We elect people because we can't study everything, we can't understand everything, but we elect people in order that they study the issues, contact the right advisors, and come to the right conclusions. You start by saying, Governor Christie, Governor Bush, Senator Cruz, I haven't had a raise in 6 years, and my costs keep going up, and every time I go to the store, it costs me more, and I'm slowly losing, and my retirement account isn't what it should be. Why is that? And is the Fed policy of zero interest rates, does that have a factor in that? I have a small business. I can't get a loan. 10 years ago, they'd give me a loan if I had a pulse. Now I can't get a loan even though I have a perfect credit rating. I can't expand my business. I can't get a loan for anything because the banks don't want to lend out money at zero interest rates.
Right.
They're keeping it. Why is that? Should that change? Those are the kind of questions people should ask.
And another thing that you brought up yesterday, which was a good point, was you called advisors to presidential candidates, you called them the staph infection. Will you explain that?
Well, we now have a whole industry. New Hampshire understands this better than most states. We have a whole industry around electing candidates. And the candidates, many of them are careerists. This is what they do for a living. They wouldn't know what to do if they weren't in a public office, or they wouldn't have the kind of income and benefits that they have come to expect. So in order to not make mistakes, they surround themselves with lots of consultants who'll tell them what to say, what to do, and how to present themselves. And some of that advice is fine. You want a professional candidate. But it's basically taken all the spontaneity out of campaigning. People are afraid to say anything that's politically incorrect. This is why Donald Trump has had an impact on people, because he's not just another blow-dried guy mouthing platitudes. And I think he's an imperfect vessel, don't get me wrong, but certainly the reaction that he's gotten from people is because we've turned candidates and surrounded them with bubble wrap.
Right.
And they don't say anything new, and they don't say anything or do anything unless it's been poll tested. I think that a lot of these consultants and staffers have their own interests at heart, not the candidate's interest and certainly not the country's interest. I call them the staff infection. Many of them are there because some of them get a percentage commission on TV ad buys, which is one of the reasons grassroots politics has died outside of places like New Hampshire, because you don't get money if you build a grassroots effort, you get money if you put ads on TV.
Right.
You don't get a commission if you build a grassroots effort. I think a lot of these consultants have lost a lot of elections, but they still keep getting hired. This is one of the only business I know where if you keep failing over and over again, you still get hired.
Yeah.
So I don't get it. And I think that what I love New Hampshire's retail politics, and I love the fact that the voters have direct access to the candidates and they can question them. I don't like the fact that there's this entire cottage industry that's built up that's now embedded in the economy of New Hampshire about electing presidential candidates. And frankly, which candidate you go with often has nothing to do with their ideas. It has to do with who offered you the most money, and that's fine. So this is capitalism written small, but that isn't necessarily the best way to elect a president,
Right.
and it isn't necessarily the best way to have a candidate who actually speaks their mind and comes up with fresh ideas for our problems.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
I really
Kimberly.
appreciate it. Your
Thank you.
speech was great
Well, I'll
yesterday.
be up in New Hampshire along with all the other candidates, and I hope we can see each other then.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Sure.